Good morning, everyone. I'm Pam Helton with the Georgia Municipal Association, and I'd like to welcome you this morning to GMA's webinar featuring the basic functions of using QuickBooks for your local government accounting. We hope that based on your feedback today that we will be able to offer a series of webinars on the uses of QuickBooks for government accounting, and we look forward to doing so. This webinar will be recorded and placed on our website in the upcoming week, so be looking for that you can go back and view it at your convenience. While you're browsing our website, be sure and look at our other recorded webinars that we have online. We have one on budget preparation, code enforcement, and we also have the E-Verify and Save Reporting instructions webinar on our website. I just want to let everybody know that everyone is muted, and so therefore you will not be able to talk, but you can ask questions by typing them into the box on the right-hand side of your screen, and Sabrina will get to those as soon as she can. Our presenter for today is Sabrina Cape, who is with Capable Financial Solutions, and many of you know her. She taught financial management classes at the Carl Vinson Institute of Government, and GMA used her to teach our elected officials financial management as well. She now has a financial management consulting service and offers services for local governments to help them with their financial management needs. So we're going to get started and hope that you will enjoy the webinar and find it very informative. And as always, feel free to comment and have questions for us later. Give us a call, or if you would like to suggest some other webinars, we would be glad to entertain those thoughts as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina to get started.
Thank you, Pam. I am Sabrina Cape with Capable Financial, and I'm going to lead our session today. And our session today is setup and navigation. Just like Pam mentioned, we do welcome your questions. Just type those in. And if I do see that your question is a little bit specific to your government, I may not get to it during the webinar, but I will follow up with you after the end of the webinar directly related to that question. As we get going, let's take a look at our objectives for today. As Pam mentioned, GMA is very in touch with their membership, and they really listen to what their membership is asking for and what their membership is desiring. And based upon what was heard from visits with small cities around the state of Georgia, we've developed this tool today as a first in our series to help those cities currently using QuickBooks to optimize its use and functionality to the best of their ability. QuickBooks Pro 2013 is not technically designed for fund accounting, which is what local governments use, but QuickBooks is oftentimes a less expensive alternative that many cities use in conjunction with their other software applications. Like, for example, they still have their utility billing software, occupational tax software, property tax software to report on those, but they use QuickBooks for their financial and their payroll needs. We've attempted to combine the specifics within QuickBooks Pro 2013 with material that is specific to Georgia, such as the Uniform Chart of Accounts and other financial laws that cities must understand so that they can use the QuickBooks products more efficiently in the day-to-day operations of running City Hall. Keep in mind, QuickBooks has not been designed to perform fund accounting as it truly exists that is unique to government. We've created some workarounds to help us make QuickBooks Pro 2013 adapt to our needs. I do want to mention that we are not representing QuickBooks in these tutorial sessions. All rights related to QuickBooks remain within Intuit, and you'll see notations at the bottom of the screen. The very first of our objectives today is to actually set up a new company inside QuickBooks Pro. The QuickBooks calls it a new company, but for us it's actually a fund. A fund is a separate set of books, and we maintain several funds in our cities. For example, in Georgia, you may have a general fund, a SPLOST fund, a water and sewer fund, although They can be several other funds. These are the main ones that we tend to see. But I do want to caution you, though, just because you think there is a separate checkbook means that it's a separate fund is not necessarily the case. For example, if you had a city beautification checkbook, that might be part of the general fund. So the general fund might have its main operating checkbook and the city beautification checkbook, but they might both be within the general fund. The main reason for keeping a separate checkbook might be for some type of special project, but I just don't want anyone to get confused thinking just because I've got a separate checkbook, I've got a separate company. Therefore, the very first step in the setup process is determine how your fund structure currently is, how you've had your account structure and your fund structure before you set it up inside QuickBooks. In our examples in this session we're doing today, we're going to be using the general fund as our company in QuickBooks because this is normally your largest fund and everybody has one. So let's get back to kind of how we create that. We would click on File and then we would click on New Company. The Uniform Chart of Accounts is what guides us with respect to how we set up our funds. The Uniform Chart of Accounts was put in place back in the late 90s. The chart doesn't require necessarily that you use the numbering scheme, although it is highly recommended, but it's, the fund structure is recommended and required. The fund structure, you can get complete details inside the full Uniform Chart of Accounts document that can be found on DCA's website. But this is an excerpt that shows just what the fund number is and what the fund name is. So the general fund in our cities is normally Fund 100. The general fund is used to account for most of your activities inside the city, and that is why we're going to concentrate on that one today. However, there are other funds that you may want to consider setting up inside of QuickBooks. The Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax, or the SPLOST Fund, Fund 320, is a good one that you might want to consider setting up inside QuickBooks as well. And the Water and Sewer Fund is also common for our cities, and this would be Fund 505. Proprietary funds are those group of funds that are used in our cities to account for activities and act like a business. You can see all of the listing of all the different utilities, but water and sewers tends to be the most common. I'll caution you on Fund 540, Solid Waste Fund. Some cities in Georgia put their solid waste fund inside their general fund. Some cities inside Georgia have a separate enterprise fund for solid waste and garbage. What determines whether you are putting it into a general fund or whether you are putting it into a proprietary fund determines on your population. If your population is less than 5,000 as a city and you're not really in the business of the garbage collection, then that's why oftentimes you will find it in Fund 100. That's why you should consult where you have been placing it before. Now we're going to get started kind of setting up the company inside of QuickBooks, or in our case, we're going to set up our fund, our general fund for our city. So after we clicked the new company box, it will bring up this dialog box, and we'll be using the Express Start option because we are not going to be exporting files. We're going to be keying things one by one, although we'll be showing you how the export process actually works. The company name. The most important thing for cities to do in the company name is to make sure that you put what fund it is. If you just put Exampleville and you set that up in all of your QuickBooks companies, then you'll not be able to tell the general fund from the SPLOST fund from the water and sewer fund. So it's important for you to make sure in the company name that you put City of Exampleville General Fund, or whatever can actually fit. You may have to put just the city name and general fund. The industry here, we will put other or none because we are not a nonprofit, but it's basically just the most appropriate choice right here. Under the company type, we'll go ahead and we'll put other and none, and we'll input your federal ID number. And the question at the bottom, do you have employees? QuickBooks is asking you this so that you basically know whether you were going to be setting up your payroll inside of QuickBooks. If you are going to be setting up your payroll inside QuickBooks, you would click yes. If not, you would click no in that particular part. This email address, when prompted, is very important. This is what QuickBooks uses to validate your license and your ownership. So you should go back to your order that was actually placed, because this is what you'll be asked for to validate your license, and you'll be prompted for your QuickBooks password that was supplied when you actually ordered your QuickBooks product. After the validation of your license is when more information comes up and you're able to enter the address, phone numbers, email, and all of the contact information really related to the city and related to this fund. Once everything is entered, you'll click on the Create Company File button in the lower right-hand corner to create the file. Right now it's grayed out because we haven't keyed in all of the information. The good news about this setup process is after you do the Express Startup, if you figure out that you've input something incorrectly, you can always go back to the top of the toolbar, Company, and click on Company Information, and then you'll be able to access the information and you're able to change anything within that information that you would like to. In this particular example that we are doing today, we are going to click on the Start Working. QuickBooks gives you a couple of different options that you can actually do your setup. You can actually do your setup by doing each one of these steps above, but we are going to do the Start Working because we're going to move into the chart, which in my opinion, the chart is the hardest thing to do because it requires a lot of thought into how you want your financial reports to look. There is no one way to do this setup. There's lots of different ways to do the chart setup, but we have done the setup in the way that we've chosen. We've chosen not to use classes in our setup. Classes are another way that you can do the setup. I just want to make sure that everybody understands there are multiple ways to set this up, and this is just one recommended way. This is the most time-consuming task, definitely. It is easier to do an import process if you are very comfortable with the import process, but we will walk through the manual process, and then we will also take a look at the import process. We're going to enter the chart for the general fund. We are going to enter it, as I said, manually. In addition, in QuickBooks, you can use classes for departments in the setup process. As I mentioned, there are pros and cons with doing this. We have decided that we are not going to use classes for a much more condensed financial statement. And the reports that you get out of QuickBooks will differ depending on whether you use the classes or do not use the classes. So for us to get started, we're going to click on List, and we're going to click on the Chart of Accounts. Automatically, you see there's a couple of accounts here. Caution, do not delete them. They are here because QuickBooks uses them in some way or form or fashion. We're going to be adding accounts to these. And how do you know what to add? Well, the Uniform Chart of Accounts that can be found at DCA's website and there's a second edition as well as a 2011 update, and that's how you actually decide what you're going to enter. You'll notice that after we click on the list in the chart, now the toolbar is at the bottom of QuickBooks Pro 2013, and we will click on Account, and then we will click on New. Here is the link for the Uniform Chart of Accounts at DCA's website, in case you didn't know where that was. We're going to get started entering a checking account. Some people say we should set up all of the chart, but I don't believe you should set up all of the chart because many of the accounts, especially the balance sheet accounts, assets and liabilities, you may or may not use for your city. So I recommend that you set up a core amount of your chart that you will be using, and then go back and activate those and add those as you see that you'll need them. It's normally best to go to the Uniform Chart of Accounts in your setup process, because if you go to your budget reports may not be using the Uniform Chart descriptions, and so that is why it's best to go to the Uniform Chart and then to compare it to your budget reports that you've been using and your financial reports that you've been generating, and see where the differences actually are. If you start with your internal reports, sometimes you really will put things in there and set those up in a way that is really not compliant with the chart. So it's a good time as you're setting up QuickBooks to make the switch and go ahead and go over to the Chart of Accounts, since the Uniform Chart has been being required since the late 90s. So this is our Uniform Chart and our checkbook, and we're going to enter the cash account, which is $11,100. The first thing that happens when we do list, chart, and then new account is it asks us what type of account this is. For a checking account, we will click Bank. The majority of the accounts that you are going to be setting up will be in the income or expense category, but the checkbook actually will be inside the bank account. Then you'll be prompted to enter your routing number and your bank account number. These come at the bottom of your check, and you enter the bank account number and the routing number, and then you click on the Enter Opening Balance. The Enter Opening Balance, the reason you're clicking on that and helping that is that you can you want to use this in order to reconcile your bank statement. So when you enter the opening balance, the best time to navigate to QuickBooks is at the end of a fiscal year. The end of fiscal year, if you're a June year-end, that's a good time to start it in July. If you're a December year-end, which many of you may be, January is a good time to start it. So if you're a December year-end, you would go to your December 31st bank statement, and you would find your opening balance. And here is where you would put statement ending date, 12/31, and your statement ending balance would actually be the balance that is on your bank statement, the ending balance on the bank statement. And of course, if you are starting this as of July 1, you would go to your June 30th bank statement, depending on when you are starting your fiscal year. We're going to look at adding another account to the to the chart inside QuickBooks. We take a look at the Uniform Chart. This is the revenue section of the Uniform Chart found on DCA's website. The asterisk in the chart means that this level of detail is required if you actually receive that type of revenue throughout the year. When you're setting up your revenues and expenditures, it's important to think about how you want your financial statements to group accounts. Setup of accounts will dictate how some of the groupings are done. In QuickBooks, if you want your monthly statements to subtotal by categories, you must use sub-accounts in your chart setup. For example, 31.0000 might be taxes as the category, and then there are other accounts underneath them that are sub-accounts. So we're going to see how setting up a few of these might look, and we're going to first start with the headings and then the sub-accounts that go underneath them. Back inside QuickBooks, we still go to List and we go to Charts and we do the New, but this time because we are setting up revenue accounts, we are going to click on the Income button, And when we click on the income button, we will click on continue. It brings up now our account type that we're going to first set up, remember, are the headings, which would be the taxes. And in the upper right-hand corner, we would put the number 31.0000. This time we're going to set up the general property tax category, and we're going to make it a sub-account of the 31 taxes revenue. So what this means is the general property tax will group under tax revenue. And in the upper right-hand corner, we will put 31.1100. And again, we will save and close. So in these two examples, all we did was set up our header of taxes revenue, and then we set up the general property taxes underneath. You see that there is an indentation here. What that indentation means is that the 31.0000 is what we call a non-posting account, which means it's a header and a place value. We're not going to really enter transactions there. How do you know what the groupings are? The Uniform Chart of Accounts groups our revenues into 9 different categories. Taxes are 31 category. The licenses and permits are 32. Intergovernmental, 33. Charges for services, and you can see the remainder of the list. These are the 9 categories that the Uniform Chart has actually established. So we went in and set up a few based on the Uniform Chart of Accounts, and we basically grouped them in the 31s. You'll see some of the revenue accounts we set up, and so you wouldn't actually record or post anything to 31-0000. You wouldn't post anything to 33.0000 intergovernmental. Those are enable you, when you get further down the road for your reports, for things to be grouped together. So your federal government grants, your federal government payment in lieu of taxes, and your state government grants, all of those will be grouped under your intergovernmental revenue category. Now we're going to move away from the revenue side, and we're going to go into the expenditure side. The expenditure side requires a little more effort in the setup process, because the very first thing that has to happen is you have to establish your departments or functions. Departments roll into functions. There are 9 broad functions, and we've got 2 examples here of departments. And the asterisks mean that this is the minimum level of detail that you can maintain in your chart if you supply this service. Of course, if you don't have a police department, you're not going to set up a police department. If you don't have highways and streets, you're not going to set up highways and streets. But we've used 2 examples so that you can start to see. Police is a function inside of public safety. Highways and streets is a department inside or function inside the public works. Typically, you'll see that smaller cities have fewer departments. Larger cities, of course, have many more departments as you go through a chart setup. Here are the function groupings, just like we saw for the revenue side. They are driven by the first digit. There are 9 different functions that the chart groups things in. The general government function will start with a 1. The judicial function will start with a 2. Public safety will start with a 3. Public works with a 4, and so on. Before setting up QuickBooks expenditures, the very first thing you should do is figure out what departments you want to set up and functions, because that will drive a good bit of your setup process. Again, just like we did on the revenue side, You need to set up your headings or your groupings before you set up all of the individual line items as your sub-accounts. So we're going to use the highways and streets as our example. Now, one of the things you will notice is in the right-hand corner, we didn't put a number this time. We basically put the number 4200 inside the actual name. This is a workaround in order to do what we want it to do on the financial reports. This is one of the ways that you can actually make your financial reports look the way you want them to look. Then we will go and we will set up the various line items that you're accustomed to seeing and charging things to in your day-to-day operations. And we're going to, in this example, set up salaries and wages. And we set up salaries and wages, but this time we click sub-account so that we know that we make it a sub-account of the streets, the highway and street function. Again, we've done a workaround. We have not used an account number in the upper right-hand corner. The account number is in the account name. We've entered several so that you can start to see how the groupings actually work. You'll see the 51 category is our personal services category. That's for all your salaries and your benefits. Your 52 category is for your professional services or your purchased and contracted services. The 52 category is where you pay a lot of your vendors related to the services that they provide. So this is all underneath the 4200 category for highways and streets. You can see that this would be a time-consuming task. Therefore, some folks like to set up everything inside a spreadsheet and then import it into QuickBooks. If you are accustomed to using Excel and enjoy using Excel, then that oftentimes is a quicker alternative for you. So we just want to show you how that could work. This is what the spreadsheet would look like just for the 4200s. Colons are what separate the subgroupings. So you see the 4200 highways and streets and then a colon, and then you see any other account and then a colon, and then the detail accounts that you may want to set up depending how much detail you actually want to capture. Just remember the chart, the minimum level of detail you're required to do is at the asterisk level. You can always have more detail if that's what you choose to do, but the asterisk level is actually what you are required to do. And again, in the type here, you would have your expense for the various expenditure accounts that you set up. And just a refresher, these are the categories inside each department. So for example, inside streets and highways, you would have different categories of expenditures or groupings of expenditures. 51 again would be those personal services and our people, and 52 the purchased and contracted services. The supply category would be in the 53s, and then capital outlay would be in the 54. Now, if you're unsure kind of what accounts go where and how all of that works, basically, again, the Uniform Chart of Accounts has a detailed description for every category and for every line item inside the chart. So far in the process, we have looked at setting up a new company inside of QuickBooks Pro 2013. We've set up our general fund, although we know that basically we can set up the SPLOST fund or a water and sewer fund similarly, but we've chosen to set up each fund as a new company. Then the second thing that we've done is we've looked at how you would go about setting up your Uniform Chart of Accounts. We set up a bank account, we set up several revenue accounts, and we set up expenditure accounts. Remembering that you should first decide what departments and functions that you are going to use before you start that setup process. And we also discussed that you should go to the Uniform Chart of Accounts to determine which accounts you should set up as opposed to starting from your internal documents. Now we're going to familiarize ourselves a little bit with the navigation of QuickBooks Pro using some of the resources that QuickBooks have actually built inside of them. The Help menu has tutorials and guides that will assist you with questions. The Quick Start Center is where a navigation guide can be used. So here under the Help menu, if you click on the Quick Start, it'll bring you to a couple of different things. That in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that there is a video camera or a movie camera with a yellow arrow beside it. And this is how to navigate and to get around QuickBooks. The tutorials that are inside QuickBooks are very short, but you're able to stop and to stop and go so that you can actually take it at the pace that you need to in order to find out how it's best to actually navigate. The navigational tools I find are very helpful, and it's a very good thing to do, especially if you are a new QuickBooks user and you haven't done anything inside QuickBooks before. The home page is like any home page. It's a great place that basically kind of takes you back to start, and so that you know that you're starting out fresh. And here's kind of what the home page looks like. And the home page has a couple of different things inside it, and it's important to know what each one of these sections do and what each one of these sections mean. The area over here in yellow to the left, these are your functional areas inside QuickBooks. If I'm looking for something functionally, I go to this area. For example, if I want to click and I want to find something related to a vendor and what I've paid a vendor, I click on the left-hand side and I click vendor. But you can also get to that same place by the area that is orange. You can click on the yellow, not the yellow, but the blue box at the top. You could click on vendors and you could actually get to the same place. The area in orange is based on process flow. You will notice the arrows are going in different directions. So because the arrows are going in different directions, that is a process flow, meaning do step A before you do step B. For example, for vendors and accounts payable, you would enter the bill before you would pay the bill. In payroll, for example, you would enter the time before you pay your employees. In invoicing and customers, you would create the invoice, you would receive their payment, and then you would record the deposit. You're following the flow and the arrows across. So the orange arrow is based on the flow. The red arrow indicates you can click on these and it will take you to that full section. If you want to see everything related to payroll, click employees. Now, and we haven't gone through the process yet of setting up payroll, so you do not see as many icons on the bottom as you would if we had already completed the payroll process setup. If you want to go to your vendors and accounts payable, you could click on that box up at the very top and be able to see those. So again, navigationally, you can get to the same place multiple ways. In yellow, you can get it by functional arrow. In the orange, you can click by process flow, and the red will click you to the take you to the full section of that particular area. If anybody has any questions, just a reminder to go ahead and just send those in.
Sabrina, you do have a question from one of the panelists.
Okay. Okay.
The question was about the account numbers that you said not to use that box when you were typing in the expenditure accounts.
Right.
You would use that box only for the revenues. Is that correct?
You would use, I'm going to go back to that screen if I can, just to show you. when setting up your numbering scheme, when you are setting up assets, which include like your checkbooks, when you set up your liability accounts, which could be like anything you owe to people, accounts payable, different account numbers there, you would put an account number in that upper right-hand corner. When you set up revenues, you would use that numbering scheme. The only time you would not use the numbering box in the right-hand corner is when you are setting up expenditures, because we're doing this so that your budget to actual reports, we're doing a workaround so that your budget to actual reports will be less cumbersome inside of QuickBooks so that you can print things a little bit quicker. If you use classes, which we are not doing in this example, but if you were using classes where you set up each of your departments as a class, then yes, you would put that account number in there. But for our example, we're using a workaround to show you what it might look like the other way.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
This is a page from one of the guides that are inside QuickBooks. Guides are very useful because in QuickBooks they have 3 different kinds. They have a quick start guide, a user guide, and an official guide. And there are 3 different levels of detail. But inside the guides, again, navigationally, this can kind of go over how you get to where. Up at the very top, you can do all of your tasks using the menus. The menus can take you anywhere inside of QuickBooks that you actually want to go. And in the white space, this is the home page like we talked about, and then how you know you're at home is up at the top. It'll say City of Exampleville, and then it'll say Home. So you know that you are at the home page, and this is kind of how you navigate to all the places inside QuickBooks, the vendors, the customers, and the employees. Again, like we mentioned on the left-hand side, this is how you create some of your own shortcuts. You can customize your shortcuts. This is your functional area, and this is a way that if these are things you come to frequently, you can customize that to make those to be the ones that you go to the most often. In the employee that is actually there, remember that is a center. So it's an employee center or a customer center or a vendor center, and you can go to each one of those by clicking there. And if you want to customize your home page, meaning, okay, my screen doesn't look like your screen, so how do I get my screen to look like I want it to? The way you do that is through under QuickBooks up at the top, you would click on Edit, and then you would click on Preferences and your desktop view, and then by changing your preferences will determine what shows up. For example, if I answer in my preferences that I'm not going to do invoicing, then it'll remove all the stuff from my home page where I do invoicing to customers. If I'm not going to do payroll inside QuickBooks, and in my preferences I tell them I'm not doing payroll, then it will remove the payroll side. So that's how you get your screens to look. So oftentimes you'll see somebody set up QuickBooks, and then another person will set up QuickBooks, and you're like, well, my screen doesn't look like that screen. That's all within your preferences and your preference setup. As I mentioned, these navigation aids, the Quick Start aid and the guide is about 8 pages. The user guide is for a little more experienced user as you start to use it for a few days, a few weeks. But the official guide is when you're really trying to find some in-depth answers. And of course, you can always use the help in the Quick Start Center too. So today we've done 3 objectives. We've set up our QuickBooks company. We've done our general fund Exampleville. We've shown you how to set up a few charts, a few line items inside your charts and the groupings to get that chart to look like financial statements, because keep in mind a chart is just kind of where we post information. but how we actually process that information and present that information is based on how we do those groupings and those sub-accounts. And we also went over how do you actually navigate inside of QuickBooks Pro 2013 using all the resources that QuickBooks already has within it and knowing what those are. We've at the beginning of the session, we talked about future sessions and what those needs might be, and that will be basically driven by what we hear from you. So if you will let us know what types of things you're wanting to learn and to be more efficient inside QuickBooks, you can use that. I did just get a question that says, can you set up utility billing for water customers on QuickBooks? There are a couple of things related to that. It depends on how large your customer base is, and it depends on how your rate structure is actually set. Most of the time, people do not use QuickBooks for utility billing. They typically use a different utility billing software. They run reports out of utility billing and then enter that information inside of QuickBooks so that they basically both are integrated. But most of the time, it's not really recommended to use QuickBooks and to actually for your utility billing software itself. Pam started the session today asking for your feedback, giving more information on the types of things that you would like to see. GMA is listening to your feedback, and they desire to, really make tools that are helpful for you to run day-to-day operations at City Hall. And if no one has any further questions, I want to thank you for attending with us today. And if you have QuickBooks specific related questions, if you'll contact me, and our email addresses are there in the event that you have a specific question that we weren't able to address in the initial setup. And again, we look forward to having more information from you on what you desire to see in the future.
Sabrina, you do have one more question.
Okay.
The question is, when you established the checking account, you entered the bank statement balance.
Yes.
The question is, how do you deal with uncleared checks from your previous system?
The uncleared checks from your previous system, what happens is when you go into QuickBooks, we are going to have a module on bank reconciliation that will show you the specifics related to it. But over here in the right-hand corner, there'll be a reconcilement that you'll go through on your first month. When you go through on your first month, you can do it a couple of ways. One of the things that some folks do is they enter those checks and they date them December 31st, 2013, for example, and so that basically they can clear them in January when they clear. So there are a couple of different options that you can use there when you're actually entering those checks. So, and when we work on the reconciling module, we'll actually show you a little bit more about the specifics about how to do that.
Thanks, Sabrina. If there's any more questions, you can type them right quick, and if not, then I just wanted to thank everybody for participating. I hope you have found it to be useful, and we would look forward to your comments about any other ways that we can help our local governments with any of their training or education needs and trying to help them with their jobs. So with that, that concludes our webinar, and have a great afternoon. Thanks.